So hello, Tama. I hope you are doing great. Thanks for accepting this interview because I know you are really busy. So to present you, quickly, you are an Australian actor, an artistic director, and a writer. You wrote 11 plays, so-called music plays, and you are also the director of the Brisbane Shakespeare Festival, and you are working all over the world, so in Australia, in London, in Germany, in Malta, and yes. So first of all, I have a simple question for you. As a child and as a teenager, growing up in Australia from the 80s, were you already imagining being an actor, an artistic director, and a writer?
Well, no, I don't think so, because I mean, those are hard things to imagine when you're a child. I don't think as a child you know what an artistic director is. And also when you're a kid, I think you sort of think that a writer is someone who's born a writer. Like there's a big island somewhere where writers get born and actors get born and directors get born. And you don't realize that you could become one of those things. And I think it took a long time to realize that I could get into that. But I did grow up in the theatre. So my father was an opera conductor.
Okay, yes. Okay, that's what I wanted to... Okay, so you already did the theatre when you were young? Well,
I was used to the theatre. So I grew up in the opera. My mother was an opera singer, and so I was always going to the opera. Or the ballet. My father conducted the ballet as well, and also my sister is. We're staying with my sister at the moment, and she's also an actor, and so we go and see her do things. And so everybody was in the theatre. My other sister was in the theatre, and as we grew up, it just became natural to move into the theatre. Although I didn't think immediately, oh, I want to be something or other. The first thing I thought was I'd like to be an actor, but strangely, the first job I got was as an assistant director, and then all of a sudden I realized, oh, I can do this as well. And then I always had thoughts of doing some writing, but never thought about it because I still had this idea that a writer is a person born on the island of writers. And then eventually someone asked me to write something, and I said, well, why don't I write a little play and we'll see if it works. And then that worked. And then they said, can we write another one? And then that worked. And so they write another one. And suddenly I found that I was writing and I was a writer. And I think it takes a long time to realize that you are a writer. Because you feel like, oh, I'm really just an actor who sometimes directs. And then you realize, actually, I'm a director now too. And then, but I'm an actor director who sometimes writes a bit. And then after a while, actually, I'm a writer. I'm doing it professionally. And so it's really, it's like you fall into it and don't realize it's happening or something. It's kind of hard to explain.
Okay. Okay, so yes, when you started to study and then work as an artist, as you explained already, did you find it difficult to find your place in the cultural world? I mean, was it difficult to earn a living, for example, or at the beginning?
No, it still is. It still is. And it always is. And it's always difficult to find your place in the cultural world, I think, because nobody quite knows what the cultural world is. It's constantly changing around you. And so you try to fit in here, but then it moves over there. And so you try to fit in there, it moves over here. You try to do something different, but it doesn't fit in with whatever's happening. So it's always difficult to know how exactly to navigate it and where to place yourself. Should I have just chased film and television the way some actors did? Maybe that was the smarter idea, but I was always interested in classic theatre, Shakespeare, classical music, opera. So I went down that way, but that means that film and television moved further and further away. I mean, I did a couple of things, but not much. And so you're always trying to work out where exactly you fit, where you're useful, I suppose. And then slowly start to work out what sort of an artist you are, what your voice is. And I started to realize that I really sit in the classical world much more. I'm much more comfortable with Shakespeare, Molière, Racine, great operas, things like that. That's my area of interest. I'm interested in history, all that kind of stuff. And that's never really the big popular stuff. So then you place yourself in the kind of more artistic sphere, in opposition to the popular sphere, like Marvel movies and what have you. So yeah, and that desire to try and find where you are continues right through your career, I think.
Okay.
And so it's like, I'm still looking around and working out things, and now I'm starting to move towards film and television more.
Okay.
You never stop sort of moving and changing as well.
Yeah, that's the cultural world. That's how it works. That's true.
Yeah.
I want to speak now more about your creations. So you are really, as we said, we are really multi-talented. In French, we say multi-casquette. So it means that you are doing different jobs at the same time. And it's not really that common in France. And more than that, in your creations, you connect different arts. So, for example, in your 2013 play, Ben, the Life of Benjamin Britten, you make the play also a music experience, and you call it Hyperdrama. And it works practically like a movie experience when you are in the room watching the play, but also hearing it. So why do you have this need to mix all these arts, so music, theater, writing, maybe visual art and history, as you said before? Why do you have this need and inspiration?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I really do have that need. And even when before I wrote those, which are specifically written for the orchestra, if I was doing a play, I would fill it with music, like really flood it with music, usually just recorded music. You get the rights to something, and then I would always find, if I was doing a Shakespeare, I would say, well, who wrote the music for this play, famously? For instance, I did a Much Ado About Nothing, and the music was by Berlioz. So I found lots of music by Berlioz and flooded it with it. So I've always wanted to do this. I think because I grew up in the world of music, but I didn't do music myself. Okay. My father was, as I say, a conductor and a pianist. My brother's a pianist. My mother's a singer. I love music. I've always adored it, but can't really do it myself, but feel very connected to it. So, and I feel the power of it enormously, and the power of music to lift up and elevate and expand the meaning of words. When you put music behind words, as we know from all film scores, the words become more powerful and more meaningful. And it's, I think, even more so in the theater, because somehow the two arts blend together more. When there's a live concert and a live performance, they blend wonderfully. And I also just wanted always to tell other people about the music and how wonderful it is and why I love it. So I loved working with orchestras. So I go and do little bits of work with an orchestra and read a bit of poetry or something. And it was actually that play, Ben, when they said, would you say a few words about Benjamin Britten during our concert? And then I said, why don't I write a play about Benjamin Britten, and we'll fit the concert into the play. So as his life unfolds, the music comes out of his life, and his life then puts the music in context, and the music keeps driving forward through his life. And it's an absolutely wonderful combination. I call it hyperdrama because, well, I'm trying to find a name for it. I'm not sure if that will be the final name. That's the one I'm experimenting with. But it seems to, the addition of music seems to lift the drama up to a new level, and you have this unbelievable, immersive cinematic experience, as though it's all happening around you and in your head and coming out of you somehow. The combination is incredibly powerful and moving. It's also the most ancient style of drama that we have. Homer would have sung his poems to the lyre, poetry was always sung. It was always a sung art form. So the Iliad and the Odyssey would have been sung to music, and that's the way music was presented. Theatre was presented in the earliest form. So this form connects us right back to the earliest, and the troubadours through France and the Beowulf poet. They were all kind of sung and incantated. And poetry is really a kind of spoken form of song. And they're so close together when you marry music and words. And that combination, I think, is the most exciting combination of arts there is, really. Yeah, that was complicated.
Yeah, that's true. So arts, these different types of arts feed each other, so to say. And yes.
Well, they're all part of the same desire to speak about the human condition, about human nature. And words are the more logical part, where you make sense of everything. And music is purely emotional. It can reach into your heart and move your emotions without giving you any logical reason to do so. You cry when you hear sad music, but nothing has happened to make you cry. You feel excited with triumphant, joyful music, and nothing has happened to make you feel triumphant. It's as though music is a form of emotion. It is a language made not of sense, but purely of emotion. And when it plays, you feel it as powerfully as you feel the logic of words, but in another part of the spirit. So when you add words and music, you're connecting both parts, the logic of language and the pure emotion of music, and the combination is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe you could tell us now a little bit about Shakespeare. So you told us a little bit, but yeah, Shakespeare also revolutionized the theater, and you directed a lot of Shakespeare's play.
Yeah.
And you are also the artistic director of the Brisbane Shakespeare Festival. So
yeah.
Can we tell, but you already told us, but can we tell you have a kind of passion for Shakespeare and for classic theater in general? Since even in the play you write, there is always a classic inspiration. So I'm thinking about the play Bright Stars Shone for Us. There is an inspiration for Tchaikovsky. So yes, can we say you have this passion? And also, what is your relation with contemporary theater?
Well, yeah, okay. Yes, I think Shakespeare was the first thing to get me really interested in theatre. I saw the great English actor Laurence Olivier only on film, on his famous film of Richard III, and he marches to the front of the screen, as it were, right into the camera, and he starts the beginning of Richard III and says, "Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by the son of York." And he said it so powerfully. I remember thinking, oh my God, now I want to do that. I want to do that. I want to be able to do that with words. And instantly I was interested in Shakespeare. I would never go back again. So although I ran upstairs and I learned that speech and I tried to read the whole play, I didn't quite understand it because I think I was 11. And I tried to work through, but I could tell it was brilliant, even if I couldn't understand the words. And then as I was a young schoolboy, I wrote loads and loads of Shakespeare verse, trying to write my own great Shakespeare verse, and got to know the verse form, iambic pentameter, which was really good. And then I was lost. I was already full of classical music, and then I got classical literature, and that got me into all the poetry, Tennyson, Dryden, and everything, and then the world poetry, Italian and French and German, etc. So I was just bitten by the classical bug. I was poisoned by classics, and have been interested in them ever since. So, and I suppose the reason is they are the top of everything. They are the best of everything. They will remain when everything else disappears. They are the yardstick. They're the measurement of the best there is. And I want to exist in a professional sphere where I'm working with the best there is all the time. And if I write, I'm aiming for that, if possible, and don't think I will ever get there, but that's what I'm aiming for. So always connected with that. I found myself doing Shakespeare, trying to be in Shakespeare as much as possible, would choose the Shakespeare auditions as much as I could, try to direct Shakespeare as often as I could, and just got to know him more and more and more. He is the greatest of all dramatists, and all modern drama springs from him. I think he revolutionized the theatre in that he actually drew real people for the first time. You can't say he revolutionized theatre in the way Brecht revolutionized theatre, so a new theatrical theory or anything like that. He was a conventional playwright. All his plays are quite conventional. They're the same as other people have been doing for a long time. The one difference he made is he really observed how people actually act. So instead of the more academic playwrights like Christopher Marlowe and Thomas Dekker and Hayward, who are his contemporaries, they would write the way people are supposed to act more. A hero should be heroic, and a villain should always be villain. And Shakespeare watched everyone and said, well, but sometimes heroes are evil, and sometimes evil people are good, and sometimes they change, and sometimes comic people are tragic, and sometimes tragic people are comic, and he would mix them all up. And suddenly you had real people on stage rather than archetypes and symbols. And I think that was a revolution. And indeed, that became the revolution that in the end led to psychology and Freud and everything, which all goes back to Shakespeare. So he, in a sense, he gave us the modern human, because he also teaches us that it's our choices that make us what we are. Instead of an evil person being made to do something evil by the devil or his evil nature, it's a normal person who decides to make a choice to do something evil and then has to live with the consequences after that. So that's the genius of Shakespeare, is that he tells us we make our own choices, but then we must live with our consequences. And that's conscience, that's a human conscience, and the human conscience torments us. I found this idea of creating the modern human being fascinating. In terms of modern theatre, to be honest, I haven't really done that much of it. I've done some modern plays, mostly as an actor, and I've directed one really modern play, but otherwise they tend to be a bit more, so I've tended to stay more in the classics. And I'd like to do more modern theatre, actually. I haven't really done enough, and more TV and film as well. So,
okay.
But I mean, everything is always being informed by Shakespeare anyway, even the modern theatre, and everyone's always going back.
It's linked, yeah.
Yeah.
So we spoke about the fact that you are multi-talented in terms of work and also in your creations, but we could also speak about your international features. You correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you are born in Australia, you grew up there, but also in Germany. And
I was born in London.
Okay.
And then grew up in Germany for 7 years. Then went to New Zealand, and then to Australia, and then back to England. So my father was from New Zealand and my mother was from England, but they met in England, had me and my brothers. And then eventually my father wanted to go back to New Zealand, which was his home. So it took us out there for a while. But then he got a job in Australia, so we went to Australia for a while. So I grew up most of my life as a young Australian in a way. But I had 7 years here and 4 years there, and then so my high school years were Australia. Then I came back to England for university, and then I've been going backwards and forwards ever since, and a little bit around the rest of the world when possible.
Okay, and now you are between London, France, and also Australia. So does this characteristic of yours impact your work and your creations? This international characteristic?
Well, I guess it does. I'm not quite sure how it does, but I don't know whether it impacts my work or my work impacts it. The good thing about traveling all around is that you get more and more perspectives on the world, and I suppose that must have some impact on my writing and my thinking. Going to Kuwait, where I've been a couple of times, is a completely different experience from going to America, which is completely different from going to Austria, and again, totally different from Australia. So you start to understand the perspectives of the world. But one thing you do understand is that everyone's the same underneath, and they all get the same ideas, the same emotions, the same responses to the theatre. What you realize is theatre works the same way everywhere, which is nice because it means it ties us all together in our common humanity, and you become you realize, what is it? You begin to realize that art is about what we all share, whereas other things are about what we don't share. So politics, economics, business, all that is about what's yours and what's mine, and where the borders are, and how you're different from me. Most of the things that we do are about our differences, and art is only about what we share. So it's going around the world and finding out that we are all the same kind of beings underneath it all. And I think that's why after wars and things like that, the artists always go abroad and start to reestablish connections. There's always artists going out and singing a concert or doing a play. It's always happening. I think that's what happens in terms of, so I guess I don't, it doesn't change what I'm doing in particular. If I'm writing, I just try to write the truth of what it is to be human and see if it works everywhere. And it usually does.
And maybe unconsciously it impacts what you write, and
certainly unconsciously impacts what I write, but then I don't know because it's unconscious.
Yeah. That's it.
But was that the whole question? I feel like I didn't do that very well.
Yes, it was the question. How does this international characteristic of yours impact your work? So yeah, that was the whole question.
Right.
So now I would like you to, if it's okay, I would like you now to speak about your work as an artistic director of the Brisbane Shakespeare Festival, which is probably totally different from the work of an actor and a writer. So could you tell us more maybe about the organization of a theatre festival and what are the quality needed for that?
Yeah. Well, to a great extent, organization, imagination, and it is different because, well, it began because I was working with a company, actually a radio station, that was doing a festival, a music festival, but they decided to start doing bits of theatre about music. Maybe this is where I first had these ideas. And they did like a play about Beethoven to go with a Beethoven concert and sort of stuff like that. So I did Amadeus for them, the play by Peter Schaffer. And then I did a Shakespeare, which was to do with their Tchaikovsky and Sibelius festival, because there's they'd written a lot about Shakespeare. And then they went really, really well. So we made this theatre company, which did sort of more classical stuff connected with music. So I guess that's another reason why I'm connected with music, because I first began to work with this classical music radio station. And then the theatre company was so successful that we said, shall we try to make a festival? The difference between just directing a play and a festival is that you then have to think of a much wider set of ideas. For a play, you just think, how am I going to get this on stage? Whereas for a festival, you think, right, what are we going to do? Are we going to put poetry readings in this restaurant and do something in that church and use the library? And shall we get the kids from the local school? Shall we get the local theatre companies to do something? Who's good to direct? Shall we have someone else direct this place? So it's not me directing necessarily. I mean, I did the first couple of times, but then we started to think, right, let's give young directors a chance to direct something. So you start to have to look around at all the talent and see who to use. And also, what do you think people would be interested in for a festival? Would they like to see sword fighting? And so we get in touch with the sword fighting people, and they come in and they do a sword fighting event. So it's the imagination of thinking what would make a good festival, then having to organize it. And of course, there are lots of other people to help organize it as well. And so, but I think that's the only thing that's different is having a little bit more organization, and you usually step back and you're not actually doing anything in it. You're just making sure that this thing's going well and that thing's going well. I mean, for the past 3 years, I haven't been there at all because of COVID. Yeah. So I've been just sort of doing it from a distance and saying hello, and they're kind of doing it without me, but it's 16 years old now, so it knows how to run. So for this festival, I just talked about which play we're going to put on, who was going to direct it, who the actors might be. And then once we'd settled that, it kind of runs itself. Yeah, it's possibly being an artistic director is kind of more boring in one way because it's more administrative, but also more interesting because you get to bring in all sorts of different things. And you go to all of them,
Okay, thanks. And last but not least, what are your projects? So you talked about a little bit about the TV and movies. So yeah, if you can tell us, what are your projects for the months and years to come, or maybe weeks?
Yeah, it's well, again, it's hard to know. COVID has made a significant difference in everything because so many things were cancelled. Like everything I had was cancelled, and then it's a matter of trying to bring it back. And the theatre has changed a bit as a result of COVID. Nobody has any money left, which is hard. People are more cautious. They're more cautious if they don't know you, so they're less willing to sort of try you out as a new director. That's hard. There are a few things coming up. I've got to the end of this year my play about Beethoven, my Midsummer Night's Dream, which I do with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, my Christmas Carol. They're my 3 shows to the end of this year, and then next year I'm doing Amadeus again in Australia, where I first did it. Okay. And they're the shows that I have for sure. And then after that, it's trying to sort of reinvent things. So when it comes to these hyperdramas, I'm madly trying to sell them all around and say to people, what do you want to do this? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do this? And seeing who will bite, who will take them and say yes. And then indeed, I've been in touch with some film and television people recently and said to them, I have these plays that I've written. Would you be interested in doing those? So they're saying, do them up as pitches. A pitch is a written document that shows people what the film might be. So they don't have to read the whole play. They read a couple of pages and go, oh, yes, this looks like a good idea. So I'm turning all my plays into film and television pitches to see if maybe someone will take those on. And you just have no idea. You have no idea if people are going to say yes or no. And you just got to throw like 100 ideas at them. And the same with the theatre, just going around to theatres and saying, will you take this? Will you take this? Will you take this? But it's sort of, you just got to hope for one big hit to come. If one thing works, then everything becomes clearer, So well, that was a big success. So now we want you to do this, and now we want you to do this now. So that's the next thing, I suppose, is just chasing where that success might come from. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you a lot, Tama, for taking the time to do this interview. And I wish you the best for these upcoming projects. And yeah, thanks a lot. That was really, really interesting.